What if I told you that The Conjuring Last Rites might not just be another horror sequel, but the actual closing chapter of an entire universe that has haunted audiences for over a decade? That's the big question I found myself asking the moment I stepped out of the theater. Because what this movie does, and the choices it makes in both its storytelling and character arcs, strongly suggest that we're witnessing not just the end of a film, but potentially the conclusion of one of the most iconic horror sagas of modern times. And that immediately got me thinking, is this really the last exorcism, the last haunting, the last Warren case we're ever gonna see on screen? Or is it more of a symbolic passing of the torch to the next generation, hidden under all the chills and supernatural chaos? That's exactly what I'm here to break down with you today, because this movie isn't just about demons or possession, it's about legacy, family, and how evil never really disappears. It just waits for the next chapter of life to test us again. So welcome back to Hollywood Latest Updates. My name is Luke Harrison, and in this video I'm gonna give you my complete breakdown of The Conjuring Last Rites. This won't just be a surface level recap of what happens on screen. No, I want to really dive into the story, the hidden symbolism, and how everything ties back to the universe James Wan helped create. I'll walk you through the narrative beat by beat, but also pause to highlight the subtle storytelling choices that give this film its weight, especially considering that the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine, have been the heart of this universe since day one. What's really fascinating is that for the first time, the story shifts its focus onto their daughter Judy, who is no longer the little girl we once saw being tormented by Annabelle, but is now a 22-year-old woman grappling with her own battles. And honestly, that makes this film feel different, more personal, and more like a generational handover. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go step by step through how Last Rites sets up its terrifying yet strangely intimate story. The movie begins by grounding us in something familiar, the Warren household, but it's no longer exactly the same. Time has passed, and the once tightly protected daughter of Ed and Lorraine has grown up. Judy Warren is now 22, living with the weight of being the child of two of the most famous paranormal investigators in history. From the outside, it might seem like she's escaped the haunted doll cases and cursed objects that once plagued her childhood, but the truth is that those scars run deep. And while Judy tries to live a normal life, studying, working, and even finding love, the shadows of her past are never too far behind. What I found really interesting here is how the filmmakers show Judy's independence, but also her fear of repeating the same dangerous cycle. Unlike her parents, she doesn't want to chase after spirits or investigate hauntings, but her very bloodline and her family history seem to drag her right back into the supernatural, whether she likes it or not. Her relationship with Tony is one of the more grounded elements in the story. Tony is her boyfriend, someone she's been seeing for a while, and what makes him unique in this film is his background. Tony used to work as a police officer, but recently resigned, and this detail is more than just a throwaway line. It sets up his character as a man who's seen enough of the dark side of humanity in his career, but who is now struggling with his own sense of identity after leaving the force. The chemistry between Judy and Tony feels genuine, and the movie does a solid job of making you invest in their bond before the real horror begins. And if you're like me, you probably noticed how Tony acts almost like a mirror image of Ed Warren in his youth. A man dedicated to protection, but also unsure of how much evil he can truly fight back. That parallel feels intentional, almost like Judy is unknowingly repeating her mother's path, finding strength through a partner who shares the same fight, even if they don't fully understand what's coming. But just when you think the film is going to lean fully into Judy's story as a personal coming of age, it throws us into a chilling subplot that eventually intertwines with hers. This is where we meet another key figure in the story, a troubled man whose personal life has crumbled into a nightmare long before any demons appear. The movie paints a disturbing portrait of him. Someone who mistreats his wife and even his elderly mother-in-law, creating a household poisoned not by spirits, but by cruelty. What's unsettling is that the film deliberately blurs the line between human evil and supernatural influence. Was this man always this abusive, or has something darker been whispering in his ear for years? That ambiguity makes him terrifying because he feels real. He's not just a horror movie caricature. He's someone who reflects the ugly side of reality, and soon enough, the film reveals how his broken family becomes the entry point for demonic forces, tying his personal sins to something much larger and much more horrifying. This dual setup, the innocent but haunted daughter of the Warrens on one side and the corrupted family man on the other, is where Last Rites starts building its tension. Because you know these two paths are going to collide, but the question is, how and when? For Judy, the challenge is emotional and internal. She's terrified of repeating her parents' path, of becoming consumed by a world that doesn't allow for normality or safety. For the troubled man, it's about how his personal darkness invites something demonic, making his household ground zero for evil. And when you place these stories side by side, you realize the movie is already asking us a big question. Is evil something that comes from within us, or does it come from the outside trying to invade? That's the kind of layered storytelling I didn't expect but appreciated. Because as much as this is a horror movie about possessions and hauntings, it's also about cycles of trauma, of abuse, of families carrying burdens across generations. And with the Warrens' legacy looming in the background, Judy becomes the perfect character to explore what it means to grow up under the shadow of a family tied to both faith and fear. The second act of the film wastes no time raising the stakes. Judy's peaceful attempts at building a life with Tony begin to collapse the moment strange disturbances start surfacing around him. At first, they're subtle. Flickering lights, cold drafts in places that should be warm, objects disappearing only to reappear in impossible spots. But Judy, having grown up with the Annabelle doll locked in her parents' artifact room, immediately senses that these are not just random occurrences. Her instincts scream danger even when she tries to brush them off. What's fascinating here is how the movie uses Judy's knowledge of the supernatural as both her strength and her curse. She understands far more than an average person would, which means she doesn't dismiss the signs, but that also leaves her constantly on edge, never able to live a life of denial. Watching Judy struggle with that duality, knowing too much and not wanting to accept it, reminds me of the way Lorraine once carried her psychic gifts, always torn between their usefulness and the emotional weight they brought. Tony, on the other hand, initially tries to rationalize what's happening. His background as a cop makes him look for logical explanations, maybe a power surge, maybe a draft through an old vent. But even he can't deny the mounting strangeness. One particularly chilling moment shows Judy waking up in the middle of the night to find Tony sitting upright in bed, eyes open but completely unresponsive, muttering words that don't belong to him. When she finally shakes him awake, he has no memory of the incident. It's at this point that Judy begins to fear that her relationship could turn into the very same nightmare she witnessed between her parents and the forces they fought against. She doesn't want to drag Tony into her world of demons, but the reality is clear. The evil has already found him. And this is where the movie smartly ties Judy's personal storyline to the troubled man we were introduced to earlier. Because the very same demonic signature begins to reveal itself in both households. The troubled man's descent is where the horror takes its darkest turn. His home life, already fractured by violence and resentment, becomes a breeding ground for possession. His wife begins experiencing terrifying visions, often hearing growls and whispers that mock her, while the elderly mother-in-law sees shadows darting across the walls. But the most disturbing aspect is how the man himself begins losing chunks of time. He lashes out at his family with sudden bursts of rage, only to later claim he doesn't remember anything. At first, the family thinks it's a lie, another excuse for his abuse, but soon it becomes undeniable that something external has latched onto him. The movie carefully blurs the line between man and monster. Is the demon feeding off his cruelty, or has his cruelty opened the door to possession? That ambiguity makes every scene with him unnerving, because you never know if you're looking at a man at his worst or a demon wearing his skin. The connection between Judy and the troubled man finally becomes clearer through a chilling revelation. During a quiet moment at home, Judy discovers an old case file hidden among her parents' archives. It details an unsolved case that Ed and Lorraine once investigated but never fully resolved, involving a rural family plagued by unexplained violence. The details line up perfectly with the troubled man's lineage. He's a descendant of the Same family, cursed by an evil force that has stalked their bloodline for generations. This discovery shakes Judy to her core. because it proves that the demon's presence in both her life and his isn't coincidence. It's part of a larger unfinished battle that her parents never closed. And suddenly Judy realizes she isn't just a victim caught in the crossfire. She's the only one who might be able to finish what Ed and Lorraine started. That realization is both empowering and horrifying, because it means Judy has to step into the very role she's been running from her whole life. And in true Conjuring fashion, the film makes it clear that once evil has found you, denial is no longer an option. From this point onward, Judy and Tony's relationship is tested in ways neither of them could have predicted. Tony has to confront the reality that the world isn't just full of human monsters. There are supernatural ones too. Watching him shift from skepticism to reluctant belief is one of the more rewarding character arcs in the film, because it mirrors the audience's own journey. At the same time, Judy steps into her parents' shoes, reluctantly at first, then with growing determination. She begins piecing together the clues of the demon's history, recognizing patterns in the way it attaches to abusive households, feeding off suffering to grow stronger. And just when it feels like she's making progress, the demon strikes harder, escalating its attacks. One of the most terrifying sequences shows Judy being lured into a vision where she relives her childhood trauma with Annabelle, only to realize that the demon is using her own memories as a weapon against her. That moment drives home the film's central idea. You can't fight evil without confronting the shadows you've carried inside all along. By the time the story moves deeper into its middle stretch, the demon no longer lingers in the background. It asserts itself fully, making both Judy and the troubled man its pawns in different ways. For Judy, the attacks intensify during moments of vulnerability, when she's alone, when she questions her own strength, when she tries to convince herself that this isn't her fight. For the troubled man, however, there's no separation left between his cruelty and the demonic presence. His wife finally flees with her mother, terrified after witnessing him levitate in the living room while screaming words in a language she doesn't recognize. The neighborhood begins to whisper, calling the house cursed, and it's in this chaos that Judy feels an unavoidable pull to act. She knows she can't sit by and let the cycle repeat. This decision marks her transformation from reluctant observer to someone willing to confront evil head on, even if it means risking her life like her parents once did. The film does something clever here. It doesn't just show Judy rushing into battle. Instead, it pauses to let us see her internal struggle. Judy confides in Tony about her fears of becoming like Lorraine, burdened by visions and constantly haunted. Tony, despite his doubts and his own shaken worldview, reassures her that she doesn't need to fight this alone. This small but powerful moment grounds the film emotionally, reminding us that the heart of the Conjuring franchise has always been family. Evil feeds on isolation, on tearing people apart, but strength comes from unity. Tony's support becomes the key that keeps Judy from collapsing under the weight of her family's legacy. And honestly, it's a refreshing twist on the usual horror trope of the skeptical partner. Tony becomes her anchor rather than her obstacle. That choice makes the story feel both faithful to the series and evolved, giving Judy the space to step forward without erasing the importance of love and trust in battling darkness. With her resolve hardened, Judy begins to research the demon more deeply, using her parents' archives and reaching out to church officials who remember her mother and father's cases. Here, the title Last Rites begins to take on new meaning. The demon isn't just tormenting individuals, it is tied to a ritual that was never completed decades ago. The Warrens had tried to expel it from that cursed family line, but the ceremony was interrupted, leaving the spirit half banished, half rooted in the material world. That unfinished business explains why it continues to stalk descendants, manifesting wherever cruelty and abuse open the door for its influence. Judy realizes that this isn't simply about saving one broken household, it's about closing a chapter her parents left incomplete. That revelation raises the stakes in a way that feels monumental, because if Judy fails, the demon's hold could spread to countless others, feeding off generational trauma like wildfire. The troubled man, meanwhile, reaches a breaking point. Possession movies often show a gradual erosion of humanity, but here the line vanishes completely. He becomes a vessel for the demon, attacking his own wife and attempting to harm his mother-in-law before neighbors intervene. When authorities finally arrive, they're horrified by what they witness. A man speaking with multiple voices, his eyes blackened, his body contorting unnaturally. Instead of arrest, the incident pushes the local church into action, with a priest summoned to perform a preliminary blessing. But the demon mocks the attempt, laughing in guttural tones and calling out Judy's name, even though she's nowhere near the scene. That moment sent chills through me because it confirmed what Judy had feared. It knows her, it wants her, and it won't rest until she steps directly into the battle. By personalizing its threats, the demon elevates itself from just another generic monster into something far more sinister, a nemesis forged from her family's unfinished fight. What I really love about this section of the film is how it weaves Judy's personal history into the larger supernatural conflict. We see her haunted by visions of her father Ed, urging her not to run from who she is, while Lorraine appears in dreamlike moments warning her of the heavy cost of confronting evil. These sequences aren't just fan service. They reinforce the idea that Judy isn't simply continuing her parents' work, she's carrying their unresolved burdens. The title Last Rites again resonates here, not just as a ritual for the dying, but as the symbolic closure of a family story that has spanned decades. Judy's arc shifts from fear of inheriting her parents' curse to realizing that the only way to free herself is to face it. And that thematic weight makes this installment feel like a true culmination rather than a routine sequel. The escalation builds toward an inevitable convergence. Judy and Tony are drawn to the very house where the troubled man is being kept under observation by both the church and local authorities. They don't go in as heroes. They're terrified, untrained, and fully aware of the dangers. But Judy knows the demon has attached itself to her bloodline just as much as his, and running won't stop it. The house itself becomes a character, saturated with evil, the walls shaking, the windows cracking, as if reality itself is straining under the weight of possession. In one of the film's most unnerving sequences, Judy hears the demon call out to her in her mother's voice, pleading for help. It's a psychological attack designed to break her will before the true exorcism even begins. And yet, instead of running, Judy steels herself, whispering a prayer that echoes her parents' faith. That small act of defiance signals the transition into the story's climax, setting the stage for the final battles that will determine not just one family's fate, but the end of the Conjuring saga itself. The fourth act plunges us into the heart of the possession, stripping away all the build-up and hesitation. Judy, Tony, and the priest, brought in by the church, now find themselves under siege in the house that has become the demon's playground. The troubled man is strapped down for his safety, though it quickly becomes clear that no restraints can hold what's inside him. His body convulses violently, his voice morphing into a deep, unnatural growl that reverberates through the walls. What's striking here is how the film doesn't rush into loud scares. It leans into silence, dread, and the claustrophobic feeling of being trapped in a space where the laws of reality no longer apply. For Judy, this isn't just about exorcising the demon, it's about confronting the generational weight of unfinished battles. And the film makes us feel every ounce of her fear and determination as she watches the possession unfold in front of her eyes. What separates this possession sequence from others we've seen in the franchise is how deeply personal it becomes for Judy. The demon doesn't just torment the man, it begins targeting her directly. At one point, the man's voice shifts mid-exorcism, suddenly adopting the cadence of her father Ed, begging Judy to stop, insisting that she can't win. It's a brutal psychological trick, meant to weaken her resolve, and for a brief moment, it almost works. Judy falters, tears in her eyes, whispering that she isn't strong enough, but Tony intervenes, reminding her of the truth that the demon is using her fears against her, twisting her memories into weapons. That moment between Judy and Tony isn't just about love, it's about clarity, the realization that strength isn't inherited or predetermined. Judy doesn't have to be Lorraine or Ed, she only has to be herself. And in that recognition, the movie plants the seed for the final showdown, shifting the fight from inherited trauma to chosen resilience. The ritual itself escalates in terrifying ways. The priest recites prayers, sprinkling holy water, but the demon responds with grotesque manifestations. The walls bleed, crucifixes turn upside down, and a suffocating stench fills the air. Yet amid this chaos, Judy begins to recognize patterns. Phrases the demon repeats, symbols it carves into the walls with the man's own fingernails. She recalls seeing the same symbols in her parents' unfinished case files, and suddenly she understands. This isn't a random haunting. The demon is bound by a half-completed ritual, tethered to both the troubled man's bloodline and the Warrens' legacy. If Judy can finish the ritual her parents couldn't, she can sever the connection once and for all. That realization transforms the scene from a desperate struggle into a mission, and Judy takes on a more active role, chanting prayers alongside the priest, despite the demon's increasingly violent attempts to silence her. One of the most harrowing sequences in this act comes when the demon abandons subtlety and fully manifests in a vision. Judy finds herself transported into a nightmarish version of her childhood home, the infamous artifact room surrounding her. Every cursed object rattles, groans, and screams, but it's Annabelle that dominates the vision. Her glass case shattered, her presence looming. The demon speaks through the doll, taunting Judy, telling her that no matter how hard she fights, evil always finds a way back. This moment could have easily felt like fan service, but it works because it crystallizes Judy's deepest fear, that she will always be defined by her parents' world of horror. But instead of cowering, Judy confronts Annabelle head on, telling the demon that objects only have power if you give them permission. The vision shatters, returning her to reality, and in that defiance, she weakens the demon's hold on the possessed man. It's a symbolic victory, proof that Judy is carving her own path, separate from her parents, yet still honoring their legacy. Tony's role also expands in this act, moving beyond being Judy's anchor to becoming an active participant in the battle. He uses his practical skills from his police background to protect the group physically, reinforcing the doors when the house itself seems to breathe and collapse inward, and shielding the priest when the demon hurls objects across the room. But his most important contribution is emotional. When Judy nearly breaks again, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the ritual, Tony grounds her with a simple reminder they are in this together. That unity becomes the film's counterbalance to the demon's strategy of isolation. Evil thrives on breaking families apart, but love and solidarity close the door it needs to enter. This theme, woven into every act of the movie, reaches its strongest expression here, giving the horror a deeper resonance than just scares. It's a battle of wills, yes, but also a battle of bonds where Judy and Tony's partnership is as much a weapon as the prayers being recited. As the exorcism nears its climax, the demon grows desperate, pushing its vessel to the brink of death. The troubled man's body bends in impossible ways, his skin tearing, his voice oscillating between screams and laughter. The priest insists they're close, but Judy realizes something critical. The ritual requires a final step her parents never completed, invoking a personal sacrifice to seal the demon's banishment. At first, she believes this means giving up her own life, and she prepares herself for it, whispering a goodbye to Tony. But then she remembers Lorraine's warning in her vision. The cost isn't always death. Sometimes it's surrendering what you fear most. For Judy, that fear is embracing her role as the inheritor of the Warrens' legacy. So instead of sacrificing herself physically, she sacrifices her denial, openly claiming her identity as her parents' daughter and the rightful continuation of their work. That act of acceptance shifts the balance. The demon roars in fury, its grip loosening as the ritual finally completes, tearing it away from its vessel and dragging it screaming into the void. The aftermath of the exorcism doesn't bring relief, it brings silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than the screaming that preceded it. The troubled man collapses unconscious, his body limp, his breathing shallow but steady. The priest, Tony, and Judy all stagger in exhaustion, their faces pale from the ordeal. For a fleeting moment, it feels like victory, but Judy knows better. Evil in the Conjuring universe never disappears without leaving scars. And true to form, the house itself seems to breathe one last sigh of resistance. Walls creak, doors slam in distant rooms, and a chill sweeps through the air as if the demon's absence left a vacuum. Judy steadies herself, refusing to let hope cloud her judgment. She's seen her parents fight too many battles to believe this is over. That sense of guarded vigilance is what carries her forward, and it's here that her character truly evolves, from fearful daughter to watchful protector, someone ready to shoulder the legacy she once wanted to escape. The troubled man survives, though barely. When he regains consciousness, he's confused, broken, and haunted by the things he did under possession. His wife refuses to return, his mother-in-law can hardly look at him, and the neighborhood has already branded him a monster. And in a sense, the demon got exactly what it wanted. Not victory in possession, but destruction of a family. Judy witnesses this and realizes a chilling truth. Exorcisms don't heal lives. They only remove the invader. The damage left behind is human, messy, and sometimes permanent. And this lesson cuts deep for Judy because it mirrors her own life growing up in the shadow of cursed objects, demonic attacks, and skeptical outsiders. The Warrens may have saved souls, but they didn't erase trauma. Judy finally accepts that her role isn't to undo the past, it's to help people endure it. That perspective turns her fear into a kind of quiet strength, and in that shift she fully embraces her parents' legacy without resentment. But of course, the film doesn't let Judy walk away with clarity alone. Just as she and Tony prepare to leave, the demon resurfaces, not in physical form, but as a lingering presence. Shadows stretch unnaturally along the walls, and a faint guttural laugh echoes in the distance. The priest declares that the entity has been banished, but Judy shakes her head, insisting that evil doesn't die, it waits. This moment feels like the filmmaker's way of reminding audiences that the Conjuring universe thrives on ambiguity. Was this truly the final confrontation, or just another chapter closed while the larger war continues? The title Last Rites takes on another layer of meaning here. It isn't just about finishing an exorcism, it's about acknowledging that endings are rarely clean. Judy leaves the house knowing the demon may return someday, maybe in another form, maybe for another family, but instead of despair, she feels prepared. For the first time, she isn't running from her legacy, she's ready to face it wherever it leads. The film slows down after this climactic sequence, offering a much-needed breather. Judy visits her parents' old home, walking through the artifact room that once terrified her as a child. The camera lingers on objects we've seen across the franchise. Annabelle sealed tightly behind her glass case, cursed coins, totems, and the shadowy remnants of cases past. But instead of recoiling, Judy approaches these artifacts with calm. She whispers a promise to her parents, acknowledging that their work would not be forgotten. It's a beautiful callback, tying the ending not to spectacle, but to continuity, to the threads that bind the entire Conjuring universe together. And Tony standing beside her makes the moment even more powerful, because it signals that Judy won't walk this path alone. Where Ed and Lorraine once stood as partners, now Judy and Tony stand as the next pair ready to shoulder the burden. It's not a flashy handoff, but a quiet, emotional one, and it feels earned. Yet the movie doesn't sugarcoat what lies ahead. Judy openly admits to Tony that she's terrified of what this life will mean. Nights without sleep, the possibility of losing friends, the endless fight against forces that thrive in the dark. But Tony, in a way that mirrors Ed's devotion to Lorraine, assures her that love is stronger than fear. It's a small line, but it resonates because that has always been the Conjuring's core theme: faith, love, and family as weapons against evil. The final images of the film are hauntingly ambiguous. Judy places her hand on Annabelle's glass case, staring into the doll's unblinking eyes, and for a split second, the doll smiles. Or maybe it doesn't. The ambiguity lingers as the screen fades to black, leaving audiences unsettled but also deeply moved. The message is clear. This may be the end of the Conjuring saga as we know it, but evil is eternal, and so too must be the courage to confront it. As the credits roll, it's impossible not to reflect on how The Conjuring Last Rites ties everything together. It isn't just a horror film, it's a meditation on legacy, trauma, and resilience. Judy's journey from fearful daughter to determined protector encapsulates the heart of the franchise, showing that the fight against darkness is never truly over, but it can be faced with courage and love. The troubled man's story serves as a reminder that human cruelty and supernatural evil often intertwine, and sometimes the scars left behind are worse than the possession itself. And Tony's role reinforces the idea that nobody can fight alone. that partnership and trust are the foundations of survival. By the time the final frame cuts to black, the title feels fully earned. Last Rites isn't just a ritual in the movie, it's the closing ceremony for an era of storytelling, a farewell to Ed and Lorraine's world, and a symbolic handoff to Judy. Whether the universe continues or not, this feels like a true conclusion.